Hello, welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and boy, oh boy, do I have a guest of all guests for you fine listeners today. We are going to be speaking with Jamie Lewis of the legendary Plague of Strength website and its precursor, Chaos and Pain, as well. I'm going to give you just a warning ahead of time. If you got kids in tow, now might be the time to turn this off because there will probably be some grown-up language. So this is something you can put in your dirty little favorites file for later. But that would just be my first and final warning, because from here on out, it's just going to be berserk all the way through. We're going to be talking about the history of calisthenics. Jamie is an excellent historian of all things strength. We had a great conversation before the podcast even began on this topic and a variety of other ones. And I think this is going to be one for the ages. So I definitely recommend that you strap in and get ready. And before I go on, I also want to make mention that if you are a new listener and you are not yet familiar, I recommend you get my free 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. Go to 9minutechallenge.com. It is a raucous good time. I've had a lot of people tell me that they've put it into their regular training, so it fits in very nicely. It doesn't interfere with it. And they've noticed it gets them stronger, improves their stamina. Sex appeal, I don't know. Nobody has really said anything about that yet, but you can be the first, perhaps. So 9minutechallenge.com if you want to grab that for free, and I think you'll enjoy it. So now, without further ado, Jamie Lewis, thank you for coming on the show.
You are welcome. One thing you forgot to introduce me as. Well, you might not have known,
Sure.
but quietly, I also represent Mr. Adam Carolla, Jamie Lewis Esquire, and I'd like to let you know that Hebrew Hammer is a trademarked and copyrighted nickname of Adam Carolla, and so you should be checking your mailbox anytime, and we'll have some paperwork in there for you.
Excellent. I can't wait. I'm
Did you not know that? Did you not know that Adam Carolla calls himself the Hebrew Hammer?
I didn't know that. I knew that there were. Well, now I'm excited.
You're probably the 8 millionth Hebrew Hammer, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. Max Schmeling might have been the Hebrew Hammer as well, I think.
There's another guy who's I think he's like an MMA fighter or a wrestler or something like that, who also goes by the Hebrew Hammer.
Yeah, so, well, I think, Max Schmeling was, he was the Jewish guy who fought that Nazi boxer. I don't know, whatever the fuck his name is. Anyway, or Max Schmeling fought Max Baer. It was Schmeling or Baer. One of them was a Hebrew Hammer.
One of those two, yeah, exactly. Well,
anyway,
I look forward to
totally off track right out of the gate.
That's perfect. That's excellent. Like I told you, this is going to be one for the ages. It's going to be all over the place. And you know, I did my best. I did my best to introduce you, but you have like an illustrious history. So I want to get a little.
If you say so.
I certainly think so.
Ignominious, maybe.
Well, that very well might be a good adjective for it. But you know, I was telling you beforehand, I've been reading your site for like easily over 10 years, and I have learned so much from it. And but as
I really appreciate that.
No, man, it's phenomenal stuff. And one of the things too, I've got your website up here too, and I want to make sure that I give you all the props in the world because you've got some very interesting background. You have a BA in History and East Asian Studies from the University of Arizona, MBA from Vienna University of Economics, and an IMBA from the University of South Carolina, as well as a year of law and coursework in history, which might explain why you're so excellent at researching all things strength. You've also got some really impressive credentials in terms of your strength training. I mean, anybody who follows your website is going to know this, but all-time, all-federation world record powerlifting total at 181 pounds raw in 2012. And you would be still number 3 on the all-time list at 165 if you had made weight in 2013. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to do all of these things, let alone just one of them. So this is just part of the mystique that is Jamie Lewis.
Well, I'd like to say first that that record was attained while drunk. So pretty much anybody could break a powerlifting world record, I think.
Yeah, I think if you're in the right,
but
go for it.
Yeah, if you're in the right mindset. I mean, basically I just hated power lifters and wanted to prove that they were idiots and they sucked at training. And so that's what I did. It didn't involve me training any specific way. I just trained the way I did and showed up. So, but it's funny to hear all the stuff back to me. It ends up being a very long list, but it was basically, it's a guy with no plan. So I just try a bunch of shit until something works. The grad school stuff was, I wanted to be a history professor, and then I got talked out of it when I was working on my master's because it's really difficult to get a job as a professor, and you have to go to one of the top 5 schools in the country. And at the time, I was dating the first girl with whom I ever had sex, and she didn't want to go like to a different school, and that's why they told me that, because I had gotten into a couple of schools that would have gotten me one of those top 5 programs, but then I would have had to learn 9 languages in order to do my PhD. So many different primary source languages. So yeah, and then genetics ended up making the whole thing pointless anyway, because my entire thesis was that it was a monoculture, and now it's basically proven. So I would have looked cool in hindsight, but then people would have been like, good job.
Yeah,
we didn't need you.
yeah, you'd have gotten a pat on the back and no further recognition. But I think you're on a better path now. Now,
I think the stuff I'm doing with history, well, really what I'm doing is I am teaching history to idiots using lifting as a hook. So that's
perfect. And it works like a charm, I have to say. I think it's very easy to pick up. It's also more interesting. I think a lot of people, I think history in general is very interesting, but I think a lot of people aren't even going to dive in far enough to get to that realization. So I think this will be an easier way to reach the unwashed masses, as it were.
Yes, yeah, and also to get people to realize that history is important for a whole variety of reasons. It's not just with helping to understand the present, but actually, if you have questions about what is going on in the present, a lot of them are answered by looking at the past and be like, oh, that's why these things are the way they are.
Yeah, exactly.
When you actually first contacted me about this, and you said you wanted to talk about the history of calisthenics, I assumed you were going to come at it from a position of, I only do calisthenics. And so I was going to spend half this podcast mocking you, but I'm glad that's not the case.
Yes, no, I've definitely gone through periods where I've done primarily calisthenics just to kind of see like how or what kind of gains that you can get from it. But I definitely think that it doesn't make a lot of sense to limit yourself to just one method or another. Really only makes sense to do what's going to get you stronger. And so, yes, you can still include some mockery in there, but I know that you and I are on the same page about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done calisthenics only programs as well, but that's when I was in jail. So
correct. We can talk about that actually, because I there was a really great lesson in one of your blogs about that. One of your posts about how I remember you just said, like, if you aren't strong, it's because you don't want to be. Like, getting strong is just so ridiculously easy. And you were, as I recall, when you were in jail, you were limited to, I think you said 5 out of the 7 months that you were in jail, you had no access to weights. And so you were kind of stuck doing high rep calisthenics, but like the payoff was great, because when you got out and you had access to a gym again, you were able to crush it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when there was a period of time where all I could do was I was making TRX stuff out of my sheets.
Yes.
And so I was just doing TRX stuff, and then I would walk up and down this like 100 or 50-yard path. It wasn't a path, it was like the little hallway in between bunks. I would just walk back and forth listening to music and doing wall sits from wall to wall. And the first time, so it was like 5 months in, and I had like nearly dragged myself to death before I ended up in jail. So like, because I was in a DUI, and so I was just a mess, and I lost a ton of weight, and so I'd gotten myself back into shape. But the first time that I got under a bar, like I didn't even warm up. They had 5 plates on the bar, and I just got under it and squatted 500 without a warm up, because that's how conditioned my legs were. And there were guys in history that I'd seen that had done that, so I knew it was possible. But I don't think I needed to know it was possible in order for me to try it anyway. I think I realized it in retrospect.
Certainly. Yeah. And it's interesting you should say that because, there is, without question, there have been, you mentioned the conditioning in particular of the legs. And I think that anybody who's had to do any sort of like really arduous real world task, whether it's fighting on a battlefield or playing a sport or anything like that, they recognize that the conditioning of their body is extremely important to being able to actually perform. So whether it is strength, whether it is some sort of a sport, you have to have that ability to perform and to perform for a long period of time. So I'm curious about when it was, you said you didn't really need to discover it. It was something you just kind of, instinctively knew, and you can easily look back at the people in the past who had done it. So I'm curious, what records are there of people doing calisthenics as part of their training on the battlefield, part of their training in for sport practice, for Olympic sports, things like that? Like, how far back does it go? Like, are there any really early references, or what have you discovered in your research?
Well, I've taken the lifting of weights back to at least 4600 BC. That's our oldest. That's our oldest kettlebell that we found, and it was an ornately carved stone kettlebell. I found engravings of stone kettlebells way older than that, but I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't want to tip my hand onto my new books too much.
Sure.
But but those stone kettlebells were very common throughout the region and became common throughout the world. The word for kettlebell comes from that region. And interestingly, Indian, so that's like northern India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that whole region was where kettlebells first started out. I think Bactria is probably, at least right now, that's what we think is the home of the kettlebell, which is, do you know where Bactria is?
I've heard the name. I have no clue where it is.
Okay, it's kind of northwest of India, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, that region. Part of it's mountainous, part of it's plains.
Okay,
anyway,
cool.
So they were doing a lot. They had really cool advanced civilizations in this region that had egalitarian communities with very like planned established irrigation systems and sewage systems. So what I want to show here is that if you look in history and anywhere you find a civilization that had a planned sewage system and any kind of like medicinal plant associated with both energy and then another one with a painkiller and a food surplus, you will find a lifting culture. Whether or not we have one that's recorded, it was there because what you had was energy, you had painkillers, and you had food. Those are the three things you need in order to build a civilization and to build a body. So basically, I would say that most of the history of exercise is unknown, but like anything else, it has evolved independently over time, over and over and over. Like we've just discovered, fish talk. And it's evolved at least 33 times in the history of fish. And that's fucking individually. So you can rest assured lifting has evolved over and over and over throughout time.
Absolutely.
The oldest system of calisthenics that we have comes from India. The ancient, and it was the people, the pre-Indian, the pre-Aryan people would be the South Indian Tamil culture, that language that controlled all of India at the time. And they were, they did a lot of yoga. Well, they invented yoga. And so they did basically pole dancing. It was, they would take basically what looked like a telephone pole. They still do it in India. That's a freestanding pole. They stand it up, shimmy up the fucking thing while it's freestanding on the ground. How you even do that, I don't know. Then they get on top of it, start doing handstands, all types of wacky shit, which is wild to think of. I don't know how good you are with balance. Do you think you could balance a pole on its end and then climb up it without falling over?
Absolutely.
We're talking about it's like a 10 to 12 foot pole, I think.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to because I've seen videos of people still doing it now. I always assumed, and maybe now it's different, but I always assumed that it was just like ramrodded into the ground and it was just, wow.
You have to tilt it up. So it's basically a caber that they climb up.
It's like the reverse Highland Games.
Yes. Yeah. So they were doing that stuff. And then then you've got lifting going through that region, and the Indians ended up somehow they dropped kettlebells. I haven't even found any old kettlebells in their ancient Tamil civilization, although the ones they traded with all used them. So I assume they're there, and I just haven't found them yet. But those the Indian clubs, have you seen those things?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, those are actually from Sumeria. So there was a basically lifting culture went all throughout that cradle of civilization there. And there was a huge trade route that went through there. So the Indian club went over from like Iraq and then stayed in India and Persia, and they stopped using it over in Iraq and Turkey and everything, and started using from, I don't know. I think those two things are interesting, but it also shows exercise faddism in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. So anything that we have now, like in terms of exercise fads, I don't think any of them are new. I think they're probably things that people have already done. And every time we think we've reinvented something like the croc row or some dumb shit, and it's like people have been doing cheated one-arm dumbbell rows as long as there have been dumbbells to row.
Yeah. It's interesting you say this too, because it's like, you pointed out those three must-haves in order to have a lifting culture, right? Well, it's like it would only make sense that these things start to crop up at various different times throughout history, because once you've got those three things, you've got sewage, painkillers, and a surplus of food. Well, then people are going to start to think about other things that involve like just preventing themselves from dying. Like, how do I improve my performance? How do I get stronger? How do we do this and that? So once those things can actually come on your radar, as it were, it would make sense that they would come into view, come out of view once the food surplus dies, or painkillers die down, or sewage system runs out. And so then people think that they've rediscovered it later, when the reality or they think they've discovered it later, when the reality is they're just rediscovering it after its already long and storied existence.
Precisely. So it's my contention, and I don't know this for a fact. I'm just, as I said, this is my contention, that the earliest sport was not invented as a supplement to warfare, because the civilizations we're finding with these egalitarian communities with the plan, we're talking about flush toilets and shit.
Yeah.
4,000 years ago. Basically our civilization without with it, or basically like Scandinavian civilization without electricity is what you got.
Yeah.
And everybody being polite, nobody's fighting with each other. They're all just training because they want to train. And at the time they didn't have horses. What they had was cattle. And the people of Bactria were actually the people who created the first wheeled carts. But oxen can only travel 3 miles an hour. So we're not talking about nothing traveled fast. They were able to adapt to change as it came. And so I think that it was all pretty peaceful. Yeah. So what they did want to train for, that we know for a fact, was they wrestled. And so there was a lot of calisthenic training for wrestling, like the ancient Indians. Mm-hmm. We know for a fact, they do dive bomber push-ups, and they do squats while standing on their toes. Mm-hmm. They're kind of goofy looking. So they'll do like 2,000 dive bomber push-ups a day, and they can do like 1,500 of them in an hour. Dive bomber push-ups are obnoxious. I mean, it's a pretty good full body movement. Plus, it gives you a lot of stretching. Yeah. Which is good, because wrestling really would be the primary strength builder in that equation, not the push-ups. Yeah. If you look at turn of the century wrestlers, they used a lot of, like, for conditioning and for strength, they just used wrestling itself as the conditioning. Right. 8 hours a day of just lifting and throwing each other and then eating a ton of food. I mean, that's how the sumo would do it as well.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I remember there was an article that you had written a couple of years back on Judo Gene LaBelle, and how you talked about, mm-hmm. He didn't really even do any strength training, other than throwing a tire over his head to kind of mimic, throwing an opponent. Mm-hmm. His strength training was essentially his grappling. So he's got an old school pedigree, or had. I don't know if he's still alive. So it makes perfect sense that that would be his primary mode of strength training.
Uh, See, there was in the late 1800s, the same people who started the first gyms were the same people who created the myth of being muscle bound.
Mhm.
They were called the Turners. They were the father of the Turner system. Friedrich John was the Jan was the he's the father of modern gymnastics. He basically invented all of the modern gymnastics equipment and all the moves and everything. Like this guy did it. And those guys created the myth of being muscle bound because there were two types of gymnastics. There were light gymnastics, which were body weight shit, that included a ton of rope climbing, and they would do A-frame ladders and then do like climb hand over hand up and down the ladder, and then they would climb over top the ladder and back down. Like they would do all kinds of shit with ladders. So there's a lot more to calisthenics. I want to just impress this over and over.
Mhm.
Climb something for fuck's sake, not just pull-ups, rope
Right.
climbing, like rope climbing, ladder climbing, all kind of climbing. If you're just going to be one of those weirdos who refuses to lift weights.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so that guy, so in the early 1900s, there was a belief that people would get muscle bound, and it took a lifter to disabuse people of that and actually prove with science the idea that being muscle bound was idiotic. And they had just made up this thing to keep people away from what was then called heavy gymnastics, because they were afraid they would lose they would lose the purity of the sport, and people would lose interest in gymnastics, which is exactly what happened. But it didn't. It was a shitty thing they did.
Sure. You know, and it's interesting you should say that too, because, well, number one, I think that the two, like iron and calisthenics, go together very well. So to me, like you said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to disabuse people of the idea of lifting weights unless you are trying to just, in a very roundabout way, screw over your competition.
Yeah, or
Um,
sell them something like you're doing the Matt Fury bullshit or whatever.
mhm.
Yeah, I but I yeah, so I think Judo Gene just did that tire thing because he was afraid of getting too strong, which is sad because I mean we could have seen Mortal Kombat style like Judo Gene just tearing people in half and things.
Dude, well, you know what? There are some stories about. I'm sure you've heard. There was a story that I think it was Judo Gene. He was on I think he was consulting for a movie that Steven Seagal was in, and he asked Steven Seagal wanted to try to grapple with him a little bit,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and Judo
Tell the
Gene
story.
choked him out, and he pooped his pants.
Yep.
Like so, yeah, it's true. Like yeah, if Judo Gene had been lifting weights, he might very well have. I mean, he could have killed Seagal. Who knows? But making him
And he was
crap his
what
pants.
70 something when he did that.
Yeah, yeah, he was exactly. He was very, very seasoned athlete, and I don't know how old.
He might have been in his 80s too. And Seagal was in his prime. That was when he was really feeling himself. And Seagal's
Exactly.
a big dude, and Judo Gene's not.
Yeah, yeah. Judo Gene is a very short guy, and Seagal is huge. He was probably in his 40s at the time. So you think you get choked out by a guy twice your age, and then you crap your pants as a result. That's got to be, well. First of all, it's a testament to Gene's skills, but yeah, Lord only knows what would have happened if Gene had been hoisting some iron along the way as well.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of this guy, Joe Stetcher, who was a wrestler around the time that Judo Gene was coming up. Uh, I don't remember what his exact time period was, but he used to actually be able to pin people. He would jump into guard, like jump into a flying guard, and he would pin people just by crushing them with the power of his legs. He would do
Wow.
some crazy back arch, and he would pin them with his legs, but he could submit people just by squeezing them in between his thighs. And it was he would do a ton of squats, and then he would use a huge like bale of hay, and he would
Mhm.
squeeze the shit out of bales of the hay as hard as he could over and over and over, doing isometrics like that until he could crush sacks of oats and stuff with his thighs, and he would just crush people's rib cages and all kinds of shit with his thighs. He was like a human trash compactor. But
That's
that's
incredible.
what imagine Judo Gene with the Joe Stetcher strength. That would have been psychotic.
It would have been game over for Seagal, that's for sure.
Yeah, even at 85 or whatever.
That's really amazing. I know I had never heard of this guy before. I'm gonna have to look into that because I've always thought, like I remember as a kid, for instance, I loved the movie Goldeneye. It's still great as far as I'm concerned, but there's that the character Xenia Onatopp, and she can kill people by crushing them between her thighs. And it's like you're a kid, you're like, oh, that seems conceivable. And then you get a little older, and you're like, how strong can your thighs really get? Now you're hearing a story like this, and it's like, man, if you can submit people just by crushing them between your thighs, maybe that wasn't just such a crazy ability that this gal had.
I'm sure that there were female wrestlers that did it back in the day. I mean,
Yeah,
if there's weirdos begging for it now, there was weirdos begging for it back in the day.
absolutely.
And these societies, by the way, the ones with the egalitarianism, they do show signs of having had gender parity as well. So it's unlikely that the chicks were not lifting. And we do know that. So one of the sports where I was going with the oxen was that so all these early societies worshipped cows because that's their whole society was based on cattle. They used them to pull, to carry loads. And I mean, they're not very good at carrying loads, but they're better than humans. And they're good for food. But they would also do bull baiting and jumping. Have you ever seen bull jumping? I just saw it on the Big Show, which is on TBS. They actually had a bull jumper on there. It's fucking crazy. So they bait a bull and then they do gymnastics over it. So the bulls run at full tilt at them. And these guys that'll jump over at, cars and things, they're doing that over a bull with the horns and the whole thing, like tapping them on the head, doing all these wild flips. And you can see frescoes in Minoan Crete of people doing this. And I never actually seen it in real life. So I got a little choked up when I was watching because we get high on Saturday mornings to watch the Big Show on TBS. It's a stupid, it's a talent show. It's a very stupid, stunt-based talent show. And but I've gotten to see all these old-timey stunts, or stunt people, equestrian gymnastics and all kinds of things. And I read about all these knights doing equestrian gymnastics, but I never knew what the fuck equestrian gymnastics were. I just knew, all right, well, if you're doing the vault or the pommel horse, makes sense. They're practicing for getting on and off a horse in battle, and that all makes sense. But now it makes even more sense with the bulls and so it's all bringing it together for me.
Absolutely. No, that's very cool to hear because it's like, again, everything old is new again. You talk about, you can see in Minoan Crete, they had frescoes on the wall of stuff like this. And now you can watch it on TV. It's like how many thousands of years separate these two things. And yet we see it and you're like, who would think to do such a thing? And it's like, well, people have thought about this for a very long time.
Because I would look at these frescoes and I'm like, what the fuck? That just doesn't. Why would you even do that? But now I understand. And it makes for great entertainment. And plus, you got the rodeo clowns who have to bait the bulls and they have to be in crazy good shape. All these people are working out, so they were all going to gyms. Then when Indo-Europeans domesticated the horse, the first tribe of Indo-Europeans was from the Caucasus Mountains. So they were the Caucasian idea was correct. And they were called the Yamnaya. They raised horses for food, and then they started training them to ride them. And then they spread smallpox and war everywhere and destroyed all these pre-horse civilizations. And so we had a bunch of new civilizations come up with the horse culture, but they've taken what's left over from these older cultures that they've supplanted and incorporated into their own. And that's where the Greeks and the Romans come up with their new systems of gymnastics. And so in Greece, you had a couple of different kinds of Greeks. It wasn't just like Greece was all one culture. You had the Lycaonians, who were the Spartans and other Spartan-like people. They had their own language. You had the Mycenaeans, who were like the Athenians and things like that. I guess they were all Mycenaeans. I'm not a Greek history expert. Anyway, It wasn't just one culture. They all did the same sort of calisthenics because they were all participating in the same sports. They had the Olympics, and so they were all training for that. They mostly lifted kettlebells and stones and things like that, but they also had, as the basis of their training, just like the Indians, they had their own system of calisthenics. And so they would all do that in the gymnasium. That's where we get the name for the word gymnasium. And they would do, let's see, I actually had a list. They would do push-ups, ultra wide grip static hold push-ups, handstands, handstand push-ups, sit-ups, leg raises, lunges combined with like a tie push kick. So you squat and then into a kick and then squat back down into a kick. You do it in kickboxing classes, every kind of kickboxing class there is. I'm sure anybody who's ever been to pistol squats, leaping front kicks, high knees. They would do bar and ring work for the upper body, just like modern gymnastics. As I said, everything new is very, very old.
Yes.
And then if you go even to Polynesia, they were lifting stones. They were doing, they had a lot of tug of war competitions, and then they did a lot of wrestling and boxing as well. Wrestling and boxing at that point, really up until the modern era, would be considered calisthenics. It's all considered part of the same thing. You know, it's just all physical activity. So, I mean, you had like kings of the Polynesian islands who were like well known for their superhuman, ridiculous strength. So there was like definitely indigenous lifting culture. I mean, you just see the size of the people and you're like, well, oh yeah, yes, they were just their stomachs were filled with human meat and they were lifting stones and then using other stones to bash each other.
It becomes pretty clear how they got that jacked. You know, it wasn't a vegetarian diet and it wasn't, you know, just some stretching or whatever. They were working really hard and they were eating meat.
Yeah. And I guess they were also, you know, I'm sure there was, they had to have a lot of good, like early natal food, I guess, because a lot of and then there'd have to be lower rates of infant death. I just, at some point something happened and people just forgot. I mean, the Black Plague killed off a lot of the people who even knew what the fuck they were talking about when it came to medicine. So there was a lot of rebuilding that had to go on. It's just tough to patch in these holes because I mean, up until maybe 20 years ago, it seemed like lifting just sprang out of the ground in 1940. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but we do have, there's a first lifting text came out of in the 1500s that like the first, I guess, modern lifting text. And it was, I can't pronounce Latin or French, and it's De Arte Gymnastica. But so that was the basis for what the guy Friedrich Jahn used to build gymnastics later on. But the De Arte Gymnastica also had a ton of weightlifting in it. Like there's actually a barbell with circular plates on the cover of the fucking book.
Wow.
So yeah, so when you think that the barbell was invented in the 1800s, nope.
That's very interesting because, I mean, what we're told, I mean, anybody who's looked into it is plate-loaded barbell was, you know, prior to, they had like the globe barbells were very common in gyms and stuff like that. You see like the old school drawings or whatever, people doing side presses and bent presses with like the globe barbells. But in this case, it sounds like they had plate-loaded barbells long before the 1850s.
Yeah, I mean, so the Chinese were using weighted bars as barbells. As early as the 900s or some bar. They would use it for anything from like sword or spear training to just curls and whatever. They had all kinds of different exercises they do with it. And that bar was also popular, I believe, in ancient Greece. I've seen it. I've seen it sketched in places, and so these things just kind of pop up. But as I've been learning about lifting culture, because at times it was so commonplace, people didn't really pay too much attention to it.
Yeah.
I've come to find out that lifting and supplements go together. Literally, I mean, they cannot be taken away from. Like you don't lift without supplements. If you say you lift and you don't take supplements, then you're not really interested in lifting and you're wasting your time. And I'm not talking about taking every supplement under the sun. I'm just talking about taking stimulants like a motherfucker and eating a ton of protein.
Yeah.
You don't really have to do much else other than that. Stimulants and protein. Stimulants are key to the whole thing. And ephedra is native to Bactria, by the way. So
interesting.
All the people, opium and ephedra are both native and cannabis. Cannabis was domesticated by the same people who gave us the kettlebell and the and the ox-drawn cart.
Yeah, this definitely doesn't seem like it's purely coincidence.
No, no. And in fact, they brewed cannabis beer back then. Like they were doing the same stuff we're doing now. They were just seemed to be having more fun with it.
Yeah, probably a lot more fun. No, this is very fascinating. I mean, one of the things that I think a lot of people, when they think about calisthenics training, or when they think about strength training, they think of these kind of like isolated movements from which you don't deviate. But the reality is that, like, number one, that not only is that not true, it really limits your ability to perform and to continue to grow and get stronger. But that there's more to it than just the actual activity itself. There's also, like you pointed out, the stimulants. There's also the eating component, and a wide variety of other things that really do fit into what you call like a lifting culture. And I'm curious.
Let me ask you a question quick,
Sure,
because speaking to this, so when you see those or you hear about like Thomas Topham or these guys who were random strongmen before there was even supposed to be lifting. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And they would just make up these weird janky lifts, and you're like, what the number one, who the fuck's watching this?
Right.
Like, wasn't everybody starving to death and like puking up their guts and like drunk it? And then also, how did he just start inventing lifting all by himself out in the middle of the fucking woods? Didn't you ever wonder where these people came from?
I had a long suspicion that they had to have learned it from somewhere, because it didn't make sense that somebody would be like, you know what, I'm just gonna compile all of these random things into like a sort of a discipline. Like it just doesn't seem like feasible.
Well, you want to know where they were from?
Tell me.
So they used to hang out with drug dealers, the first supplement dealers, and those medicine carts that would go around and do those janky ass medicine shows, the snake oil dealers.
Right.
Those things go back to the Middle Ages, and they were always accompanied by strongmen and acrobats and jugglers, because they'd be like, look how strong this fucking guy gets when I give him this potion. He can't lift the thing before, give him the potion, boom, he's putting up weights nobody else can lift.
Amazing.
That's your strong man. That's where the guy comes from. And so these traveling shows were the biggest form of fucking entertainment in America before vaudeville happened. Nobody knew about it because nobody thought it was important, and they all thought it was kind of like their embarrassing their embarrassing thing that they love to do. So nobody would even film it when they first had film. Nobody would take pictures of it. Nobody would film it because it was like, that's kind of gross, but we love it.
Yeah, but so it was this existed in what we might call like low culture, or what the elites might have called low culture, and so they kind of feel embarrassed by it, rather than I think nowadays.
They were called medicine shows, and that's what vaudeville grew out of.
No, it's very interesting you say that too, and you bring up the strongman component, because there was the Mighty Atom had like a supplement line, and he would go around. This was, I think, after he'd retired, and he would go around
what a strange little. I don't think I would have been friends with him.
He was definitely. I mean, he had a storied life, man. We're going to talk
about. He did. But he seems like one of those guys who was just angry all the time. And, he would just snap out, and you'd be like, shut up, little man. Then he'd punch you in the mouth. You'd be like, oh, this fucking guy again. Jesus.
Stars, yeah.
You know what I mean?
He had a reputation. I'm sure you know plenty, probably more than I do, but I know he had a reputation of being like a real, first of all, like a dude who had no problem going berserk on people. Like,
he beat up a bunch of Nazis all the time.
Yeah,
and he weighed about as much as my shoe.
Yeah, he was a tiny, tiny dude. I remember there's a story about him just beating up a bunch of Nazis with a baseball bat, and then he was in front of the judge, and he's like, "Are you guilty of doing this or whatever?" He said, "I'm not guilty. It was a pleasure," or something like that.
Yeah.
And
he was a bad man, but he was also just an ass.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like there are all these people have a very storied history, very interesting background, and I think we like to think of our heroes or the people that we look up to as always being squeaky clean and what have you. But in reality, like because of the history of so many of these people, they were associated with what maybe, let's say, the elites or the upper crust of society might have looked at as being low culture, or the thing that they were kind of embarrassed of. But without these things, we never would have.
Well, it was also a place where they were because the Victorian era, when vaudeville came up, that was when the idea of homosexuality was introduced.
Uh-huh.
But at that time, everybody was still fucking everybody. So this was a place where like black people, white, but it didn't matter what color you were, and it didn't matter who you were fucking. Everybody went to the same spot because there were tons of like non-white people who were involved in vaudeville and medicine shows. And it was very heavy on LGBTQ, and they like a lot of the early body jokes and songs were about all that shit. And so they didn't want pictures of that. They didn't want, nobody wanted to get caught on film. Oh, arm in arm with this person or that person that they weren't supposed to be friends with. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so we missed a lot of this history and didn't think it existed. But here it is. They're out there wilding out, doing a bunch of coke, and so in all those guys from the 1800s through 1920, everybody was on coke. So any lifter you see, you wonder how they did what they did. Cocaine, and if it wasn't cocaine, it was opium, but a combination thereof. And they were also drunk. Yeah. So like George Hackenschmidt wasn't a vegetarian until he got older and realized, I don't want to hurt animals anymore because I've hurt enough people over the course of my life. And I personally, I can't wait for vat-fed meat so I can stop killing animals because, Jesus, I love tacos al pastor, and I just have a real hard time not eating it when I see it. But I don't want to hurt any pigs, and I love animals, so I will just turn into a huge mush anytime an animal's around. But
absolutely,
I like being big too, so and I love meat, so.
Absolutely. It is it's a compromise that's probably pretty tough for a lot of people to make. And you make a very good point about Hackenschmidt, because I remember reading that too, like how he advocated that people eat primarily plant matter, but it was later in life.
He wanted people to think that he was a squeaky clean guy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with all due respect to like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like he was I remember seeing a picture of him like eating this massive steak, and it's like, well, yeah, when you were in your prime, you were eating meat by the truckload, and now it's easy to say, oh, you should be vegetarian, but it's like nobody was going to see Conan the Barbarian because they had this giant vegetarian on screen. We're talking about a dude who was, eating meat by the cartful.
But I love him for he's a good heart, and it's all coming from a good place. He's not trying to. He's not the man. He loves it. He loves animals like I do. Absolutely. And I think instead of framing it, and I think he probably is framing it like, I just don't eat that much more meat. I don't think he's telling everybody, just give it some thought, which is all he's asking. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But
certainly.
Going back to Hackenschmidt, just because people like to get all fanboyed up, I would like to be very clear on how much cocaine George Hackenschmidt was on.
Please, yes.
His coach, the guy who taught him how to lift, was the personal czar of Tsar Nicholas II, who was the most vicious cokehead in all of Europe. Wow. It's why he was such a shitty fucking czar. It was actually called the best coke in Russia was called the Tsar's powder or something like that. And his coke dealer was the head of the lifting team. It was the only lifting team in Russia. And the reason for that was because lifting was illegal in Russia. But the head of the team, whose name was von Kujewski, was a Prussian noble. So anybody who lifted with him was under his protection. But they were also on a lot of cocaine. So they went out there and just trashed everybody and lifting. And it explains how like their one ringer lifter, Sergei Elisiev, used to run 19 miles in lead-lined shoes every day when he was training for a competition and didn't have a way to squat. That's how he built up his legs.
It's unbelievable.
In lead-lined shoes, unpaved roads. I mean, and that was in St. Petersburg, Russia. Like, that's outrageous, but cocaine's a hell of a drug.
Yes, if we have learned anything from Rick James, it is exactly that. But I think that is echoed even more intensely through some of these stories. I had no clue that these people were on this much coke.
Oh, yeah. So, George Barker Winship, he was a doctor, by the way. Yeah. And he was also, I couldn't figure out why the hell's a doctor traveling and who's he talking to, giving these strength demonstrations of this partial deadlift. And now I realize he was doing a medicine show, but he was also showing this health lift, and his heart exploded because he was on so much cocaine. He was on so much cocaine.
It makes sense. Now, this is the guy who I remember. I think I read an article of yours recently. He's like the founding father of American strength, basically. Like,
Yeah.
he was the guy. He was like doing like double-digit one-arm chin-ups, like within a couple of years of taking on calisthenics, things like that.
Yeah. And so everybody in America was drinking athlete's wine at the time,
Mhm.
which actually had a higher cocaine content than than the cocaine content in the European athlete's wine, which was endorsed by two different popes, by the way.
Wow.
But so these guys, and they were doing coke on top of drinking the athlete's wine. Their cocaine had cocaine in it.
Wow.
60 to 70% of the homeless people in St. Petersburg, Russia, which was the poorest developed nation in the world,
Yeah.
they had cocaine habits at that point. And so, it's a miracle any of these guys lived to old age. But when you see one of them and they're like, oh, his heart exploded. Oh, well, it must have been the lifting. No, it was the cocaine. But that's why everybody went to calisthenics for a little while. They looked at Barker and they were like, oh, well, heavy lifting blew up his heart. It was like, no.
It was all the coke. Well,
Yeah.
you know what? It's funny too that you bring this up because, periodically you'll see either memes or articles or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, they used to, doctors used to prescribe basically cocaine to people back in the olden days, and it's like what gave them the idea to do that? But then you think about these guys like George Barker Winship, and some of these other folks who had this cocaine habit. It's like, well, like they didn't just come up with it out of thin air. Like they were on coke. All their friends were doing it. Their colleagues. It just makes sense.
Well, and it had to have been a fucking miracle because you had coke. I mean, coke was, I guess, coming up in the 1700s because I know. I know it had started getting back to Europe at that point. So, like, they had these Italians going around. They were called Montebanks that were going around Europe, and those are the guys who started the medicine show.
Yeah,
that's actually where the word charlatan comes from, is these people. And so they came to the US, they started that, and I don't remember where I'm going with this, but
keep going.
Yeah, clearly I have way too much history knowledge to tell people now. I don't even know how to get it all out of my face.
Well, I think you're doing a great job so far. I feel like I've gone through like a master's class in just under an hour.
But so the point was that like the coke had been around for a while, and
Yeah.
that's, I think by the time that people realized that they had the ability to do do all this lifting and stuff, calisthenics were the least of their it was the last thing they wanted to do. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, unless you'd really just done tons of coke and then you were like, well, I guess that's all I can do. But
Yeah.
I don't think calisthenics really were an important thing to people except as a warm up after really after the barbell was invented, because by the 1900s calisthenics had just sort of become your everyday warm up. Most guys would start out with sit-ups, like a run, and then some handstand push-ups and some pull-ups.
Yeah.
And I think a run has been something that has totally been it's fallen out of fashion. I personally don't like running and haven't been running, although I feel like I need to start. Just because it seems like a natural human activity. You know what I mean?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, rope climbing was still a very important thing. And like I was trying to say at the beginning, rope climbing is one of the things that if I have anything come out of this that is in any way coherent, I want it to be climb some ropes, because everybody needs bigger biceps. And there was if you watch did you watch the History Channel show, The Strongest Men in History?
No, I didn't even know it existed.
So Nick Best, it's Nick Best, Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall, and
Oh, I have heard about this.
somebody else. They go and do different they go to different places, learn about different historical strongmen, and then try their historical strongman stuff.
Right.
And one of the guys that they talked about on that show was William Bankier, who was a really famous strongman on vaudeville. And he had 16-inch biceps cold at 175 pounds. He was like 5'6". So he was, mine are but that's 18, I guess. And I mean, I use steroids and things, but all he did was climb rope. He would climb rope. He would climb up and down a rope 5 times every day.
It's
It'd take 2
amazing.
minutes. Yeah, it was a 20-foot rope up and down.
Yeah, I have to say, I think if there's any one of the drawbacks of stuff, and I know you've got some really great articles on pull-ups and how to train them and things like that, but I think that one of the drawbacks of only doing pull-ups is that you miss out on great stuff like rope climbing. And I think that if you were limited to just picking one or the other, rope climbing will probably have a greater carryover into pull-ups than just pulling yourself up on like a perfectly calibrated bar, however many times.
I'll give you that. I think that the main benefit of the rope over the pull-up is that you get a lot more forearm and bicep action.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been harping on is the fact that I've always hated people with tiny forearms. I just judged them, and I hated that. I always felt like I had small forearms, so I just kept working on my forearms.
Yeah.
And then I came to find out that there's an old adage about you can judge a man by a man or person by their grip.
Yeah.
And it's actually scientifically proven. I've written an article about it, but you can actually tell a person's longevity is basically determined by their grip strength and forearm size.
Yeah.
And so climbing ropes will give you that grip strength and the forearm size that will actually give you longer life. I don't understand exactly how the biofeedback of it works. I don't know that science does either, but the one is related to the other. And so if you have good longevity, you probably have good grip strength and vice versa.
Absolutely. No, I remember too in that article that you had written about it, that it was, you mentioned it was correlated also with one's, I think, leg stamina, because it's like you talked about, like, just like the grip specialists alone, you're like, they may not really have like that much more of an advantage, because there is a correlation also with your leg stamina and what have you. So, but those two things together, it's like, you talked about, there's running, we've got various different calisthenics exercises, you've got weightlifting for the legs, but you're right. A lot of people don't focus that much on the grip. People are using straps, or when they're deadlifting, or any other number of things.
I don't have a problem with using straps. I use straps for both shrugs and for deadlift. I'm not trying to work fucking grip on shrugs and deadlift.
Yeah.
I'm trying to just pull heavy weights. So I just train forearms at the end of every workout, and you don't have a problem. You'll never have a problem.
There you go. And so that's the thing, is that people a lot of times who are using straps are not then making up for it by actually doing any extra forearm work or any extra grip work. I think a lot of times, now I don't know too many people who use straps. This has been something that I've heard other people talk about seeing in the gym, but that would explain why they don't have that great of forearm development, despite how impressive their lifts might be otherwise, because they're just not doing any direct forearm work or any direct grip work.
Yeah, I mean, if people just want to make it super easy, add in instead of doing barbell curls or dumbbell curls, just do on a cambered bar, use a reverse grip, a thumbless reverse grip. All of the arm wrestlers on the planet use a thumbless reverse grip for reverse curls, and holy shit, it blasts the shit out of your forearms. You get veiny as hell. I mean, it's nice, and plus your traps look big. You look yacked up, so it's nice.
I'm going to have to add those in. I like that. I've done plenty of direct forearm work and grip work, but I don't think I've ever done that before. So use a reverse grip cambered bar. Curls.
Thumbless. Yeah. Thumbless. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And just pin your elbows into your side, and it's nice. And then, you get a little loose with your form as you go. That's another thing, that the idea that you have to be binary in any of these things, whether it's doing calisthenics, not doing calisthenics, running, not running, that whatever it is, just everything's a gradient. Let's just calm down with the binaries, because just like anything else, if you mix up your form type, you're going to end up with better results. And something that people used to do that they don't do anymore is you start out with strict form, your form gets a little fucking sloppy at the end of the set. Nobody minds, but also anybody who's looking at your video and bitching about your form at the end of the bitching about your form period isn't a lifter. So but I I feel like people are way too caught up in how people perceive them lifting, as opposed to like I've come to the realization that the reason why I've always put my headphones in and made a spectacle of myself in the gym is because I have to block everything else out around me, or else I'll be so self-conscious about what I might look like that I won't enjoy myself. So I have to just, I put my headphones in and everybody else disappears. And I'm just in there going fucking ham. And I think that might be something else that I might be able to tell other people, because even if you're just looking around too much in the gym and interacting with other people, you'll start to oh, my shoes are fucking dirty. Or I don't know. You can get mean brain gets in and you start thinking weird shit. And instead of thinking about how much fun you're having, you think about, oh, well, I better get this because so-and-so's looking at me. Or, you know what I mean? And that's the wrong way to lift.
Yeah, I think people get the sense that when they're in the gym, and particularly people who are new, and I think it's very unfortunate, like they're on a stage rather than being in a gym, like realistically speaking, most people in the gym probably have the mindset that you have, not only or that you're talking about, that like, not only are they worried about people judging them, but at the same time, they want to get some good work in. But it's like, you can really only focus on one of those two things at the same time, because it's like, if you're pushing yourself hard, you're going to be making something of a spectacle of yourself, like you're going to start to look like, you're actually doing some work. And I think people are afraid of that.
Or then it becomes a show.
Yeah.
And, when you're training for your camera and you're not training because you're having fun, if you're worried about how you look as opposed to how you feel, you're gonna fuck up, or you're just gonna stop enjoying it, or you won't enjoy it in the first place. And that's kind of where I was going with the binary thinking about calisthenics. I wouldn't advocate that people not do calisthenics. I do pull-ups almost every day. I've been doing them for years. I'll never stop doing them. I really enjoy pull-ups. So I would never say don't do pull-ups. But if I didn't do so much forearms, or if I was one of those people who was like, I'm only doing calisthenics, I would definitely invest in a rope.
Yeah,
climb.
I agree.
Not to hang yourself. I mean to climb.
Correct.
In the past, I would have said invest in a rope and tie it into a noose. But I'm a better person.
Yeah. No, by the way, I love morbid jokes like that. I don't let that on too much, but like stuff like that cracks me up. I had a Spanish professor in college once. I think he was like an officer in Batista's army in Cuba, like way back in the 50s, and he escaped to the US. And he used to make jokes like that all the time. Like if somebody got a bad grade, he'd be like, I've got a rope in my car. We're going to make it a noose. And it was like, the guy was like 80, so nobody like complained. It was just hilarious. So no, but I agree. I think, and I'm personally, I have a rope here. I like the thick rope, like the 2-inch diameter, because once you climb one of those or use it in any capacity, like the standard 1-inch diameter just feels like a breeze when you're climbing up it. It's like so much easier. Yeah.
Well, you know what? And I'm glad you asked me about rope jumping, by the way, because I was also curious about rope jumping. You like that seg?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, I looked it up because I figured you were going to ask me about it. I don't know why. There is no actually established date for rope jumping, but it has been done at least in common practice since the 1600s. And it was originally only for boys to do because it was considered improper for girls to show their ankles. But pretty quickly that was abandoned because everybody likes jumping rope, apparently.
Yeah, well, I haven't done it in years. Well, a number of years ago I did Muay Thai, and it was like a big part of the, like for footwork and stuff like that. I personally never enjoyed it that much. I see the utility for footwork, but I never felt like I was getting all that much cardio out of it. It just was. It was hard to get into, but it was one of those things that it's like all the boxers recommended it, a lot of martial artists. So it was just something that you do. But I
think it's really designed to be able to do cardio in a small space. Yeah. If you don't, you can spend $3 on a jump rope. You don't have to spend $6,000 on a treadmill,
Correct.
But by the same token, just get your ass outside and run so that you work your fucking hamstrings.
God,
everybody marvels at my ass and my hamstrings when I walk down the street. And it's because I got dignity and self-respect and I don't get on a fucking treadmill ever in my life. I
Yeah.
can pull my leg, I can pull my foot back all by myself. I don't need any help. No thanks.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I
And
think that,
also, that's how
yeah.
you get your back thrown. Everybody's back is fucked up because they're running on these goddamn treadmills, which is just making their hip flexors tighter because they sit down all day and then they get on a treadmill, don't work the backs of their legs, only work the fronts of their legs. And then they wonder why their backs hurt all day long. It's
Well,
like, well, because you have no ass and no hamstrings, and your only exercise is being a hamster on a very stupid wheel.
yeah, yeah. I'm reticent to use treadmills. I'll do it like in the wintertime if like hill sprints outside are just not feasible because it's too slippery or what have you. But yeah, I think that
You know, in the winter, you could just
Zach up,
do anything else other than
then
you
run.
could shovel snow,
Yeah,
you could chop wood, you could climb a rope, you could hang yourself. You could do anything other than get on a treadmill.
correct.
Genuinely.
Yes, no, I agree. I use them very infrequently, but periodically when I feel the need to do some like hill sprints, I'll go to a nearby gym and like just crank up the incline as much as I can and just, do intervals. But it's not the same as doing it on a hill. Like, I've got some hills not far from where I live that are like 10 times more fun to just go outside and like just jet up a hill than breathing people's BO and recycled
I
air.
really think that it builds bad habits running on it beyond the muscular imbalances. It builds bad habits in running. And I don't know. If you can't hold a book and jog, like what the fuck are you doing anyway? I mean, I can walk and run. I can walk and read. I don't understand how people can't. If you can do it on a treadmill, you can do it outside. Just get your
Yeah.
head out of your ass. But you don't also need to read and run. You could listen to a book or just listen to birds.
Correct.
Or not run and just
Lift
do
things.
something that's more fun.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think there are plenty of different options, and I've always found like the preoccupation with stuff like treadmills and that sort of a thing, other than like very limited use, like I said, periodically doing hill sprint or doing sprints on them or whatever. I just can't I can't imagine it being like a mainstay in my training, especially because
Yeah, I would hope you would take a body pump class before you get on a treadmill again. Genuinely. In fact, I used to teach body pump and body combat. So yeah, I was a certified Les Mills trainer in two things.
I remember actually reading that once, and I thought
Yeah,
like it struck me as being like out of place, but I can see it now.
Yeah. I think my personality is it's not different. It's just the perception of how I am when I'm writing is different. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So
Absolutely.
yeah. It's tough to disabuse people of the idea that I'm I don't know. I guess I do look a certain way too. So it's tough. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think, well, obviously, everybody's going to make a judgment upon the first time they see somebody or what have you. But I think anybody who reads what you write is going to would have to be intrigued enough to approach you if they were to ever see you, because the stuff you write about is such an incredible eclectic mix of all things like we've just been talking about here: history in terms of of training, of lifting, calisthenics, of sports, but also a solid understanding of the cultures that they come from. And with that in mind, before we were talking about this, you were talking about a new book that you are writing, and it's probably a couple months off before it will be finished. But I'll be very intrigued to hear a little bit more about it. Like, what is going to be the topic? What's going to be the focus? And without giving away too much, because I want my listeners to actually go out and buy it, what can we expect from this book?
Well, I without trying to toot my own horns too much, I'm going to say that I would like to think this is going to be a seminal historical work that's going to be released this year. I can't imagine that a publisher won't pick this up. What I'm going to do is give the entire history of lifting as far back as I can take it, and how integral lifting is with the development and basically it's evidentiary of a level of civilization that is very difficult to achieve. In terms of like a food surplus on the level that we have now, it doesn't seem like it's been very common throughout history. We have those the civilizations that we thought were nearly pre-agricultural. The Maya although we don't have any evidence that they lifted, any direct evidence that they lifted, they had a massive agricultural surplus for like 300 years. I think it was like 600 to 950 AD or something like that.
Wow.
I mean, I'm going off of like rote memory from months ago, but they had really, really advanced irrigation systems. They had a really cool pit sewage system that purified purified even their outflow water, just like the Giraffe culture and the people in the Harappan civilizations had.
Mhm.
Which is really cool because that means they're treating their sewage before they're like letting go of their effluent, and they were using it as fertilizer. Like the whole thing, the system worked, and it was evidence that of a level of sophistication that you'll end up seeing in art represented through like muscular people and things like that.
Mhm.
So you will see this level of sophistication and culture that we have now represented on a through line throughout history. And it's kind of, lifting is kind of, in my mind, one of the greatest hallmarks of civilization. And I'm going to show that it's the weirdos, the fucking weirdos in history are the ones that have kept everything going throughout history. We've managed to keep everybody's sanity. We've managed to sprinkle knowledge throughout the world in a way that was both entertaining and useful and helpful, and not necessarily without cost, but by the same token, it was altruistic. So I think that culture and lifting are one and the same, and it's going to be interesting to see how other people perceive it once I'm able to get the entire book written.
Well, I can't wait because I am a fan. I've got, for those of you who are watching this on
nice.
YouTube, you'll be able to see I've got
Oh
365.
shit! I didn't even. I wasn't sure that this was being filmed or not. So.
Oh yeah. No, we're gonna put it on. I'll put it on YouTube.
All right, word.
Yeah, I highly recommend this book. 365 Days of Brutality is excellent. Very readable.
Well then I'm going to show off for a second because I haven't actually shown off, but I'm looking damn bodybuildery.
I would have to agree, man. You're built like a brick shithouse.
It's pretty nice. My lighting is not good in here, but I have definitely, I'm achieving my final form. It's pretty dope.
Yeah, no, I mean,
the arms are, I mean, my forearms are so big you can't even tell how big my upper arms are, but my upper arms are like 18 inches, just almost 18 inches cold.
That's incredible. Yeah, and the forearms do look very good, I have to say. I think it reminds me of like a bit like Chuck Sipes, you know, he just had these absolutely massive forearms that you almost forgot how big his upper arms were.
Yeah, Charles Vanzatart was like that too. He had 17-inch upper arms and 14-inch forearms. And because his 14-inch forearms, I mean, mine aren't 14 yet. I think they're 13.25 is what we had him at. Mm-hmm. So that, and his were 14. So they were like another little lump in, but like his arms didn't look that big. When I looked at the picture, I was like, kind of just looks like a buff, skinny guy. But I guess that was everybody's impression because his forearms were like, so
just tremendous. Absolutely.
Yeah. But the cool thing is like, and this, so I'm working on 2 books now. I'm working on another one with a French guy whose name, God damn, Axel. His name is Axel. I was like, I kept thinking your name, and I was like, it's not Alex, but it's goddamn close. Yeah, his name's Axel. He's French, which means we're going to be able to have books translated into foreign languages now, at least Amazing. French, and we're going to be able to do some German ones as well. He and I are working on a project that I started a couple of years ago. The book's called Go Viking, and it's going to be a historical / lifting book. I don't want to tip off too much, but it's going to be fun as shit, and it's cool to be working on a project with somebody else. So I don't really want to get into too much of how it's split out, but obviously I'm going to be doing most of the book writing. We're working together on the programming. I need to offload some things to other people, so I can't do everything all myself. So I'm so glad to be able to get some partnerships, and I really appreciate this opportunity to come on here, man.
It's been a pleasure, dude. I mean, like I said, I think you're one of the most fascinating guys in the strength world, maybe ever. Like, it's no exaggeration to say I've probably sent more people to your site to read your articles than to mine. So
Thanks, dude.
I'm serious, dude. I've been I want to just give a brief mention to the people who are listening. I remember this was probably 2009 or 2010. I remember reading a blog by this one guy in the kettlebell world, and it was like his top 10 recommendations on blogs. And one of them was Chaos and Pain. And he said, you know, the guy is a madman, but he's got some really good information. And so I thought, all right, I got to check this out. And I was not disappointed. I remember thinking every article I read was like laugh out loud funny, and I was taking away all of this like unbelievable knowledge along the way. It really changed the way that I thought about a lot of things, opened my eyes and my mind to thinking about strength training differently and not looking at things so linearly. And you've kept the quality up, and it only increased as the years have gone on, and you've just got a plethora of great information. So if
Thanks,
nothing
man.
else, no, I really I can't say enough nice things about it. People should check out plagueofstrength.com. I will offer this one parental advisory. If you are squeamish about porn and sometimes very strange types of porn, as well as
Don't
gore.
go too far back into history. It's the last 3 years I have been cleaning
leveled
it up.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's porn free as the last like 2 years. But
Yeah.
as you go back, I was, so everybody understands what the idea was. I wasn't
Right.
trying to be some kind of edge lord. It's just that lifting, the way people talk about lifting, it's so fucking dull. It's
Right.
so banal, and everything they say is so dry and so sterile. And so, and at the time that I first started writing, it was just I was writing for my friends, and everything was written because they were trying to get more women into the industry, which I love women in the industry, but I hate pandering to people. And so I was writing stuff like, yeah, there were these fucking chicks that used to like there was one Mongolian woman who the only way she would marry a guy is if they would wrestle her and beat her in wrestling, but they had to put up 100 horse or 100 head of cattle, and if they couldn't win, she took their cattle.
Wow.
She ended up the richest motherfucker in Mongolia because nobody could beat her in wrestling. Like, those are the type of people that I was trying to write about, and I didn't want to see chrome fucking dumbbells.
Yeah.
And I was so sick of that shit that I wanted to write something that was the opposite of that. And I'm Gen X, and so I went fucking haywire, and there was tons of porn and gore for a while, and I wrote a lot of awful things. And I've left the stuff up that I wrote because I wanted people to see my evolution over
Sure.
time, because everybody else whitewashes what they do, and if people don't see that, I had to start somewhere and to get where I am. And
Absolutely.
it's
I
only
think
fair that people see that.
I agree. I think it's only better. First of all, yeah, it would be. I think it would be unfortunate to go back and then pretend that that stuff wasn't there. I think part of the mystique of the site is that it is so much more enjoyable to read than like these clinical, like boring, like this is the kind of stuff that you could print off and like read in bed so that you can put yourself to sleep. Is the way a lot of people write about strength training. But your stuff is like hilarious. It's lively. Really.
Boy, it did seem to influence Omar Sharif's new TV show, didn't it?
Very well might have.
I didn't even know he read my stuff, but I'm glad that somebody was able to make some money off it, because I sure can't.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that. I bet you anything. If nothing else, people need to at least read 365 Days of Brutality and keep their eyes open for the new books that you've got coming up. I will be among the first to get them because I'm very excited to read about all of this stuff. Thanks, I said, dude. I'm
looking forward to finally making some money,
Sure.
but I'm putting this book out because I'm fucking excited about it. I can barely contain myself from not telling you about it. So I'm desperate for people to know this, and I'm so excited that I'm the one that gets to tell people that I'm still gonna have a hard time selling it, but but I'm so excited to tell people that I don't care that they're going to buy it. So
Good.
That's how it works.
No, I like I said, I'm going to be recommending your book very strongly, just based on the force of this interview alone. I mean, I can tell since we've covered stuff that is at least tangentially related to a lot of the stuff that you're going to be putting into the book,
Right.
like the history. It's going to be one for the ages. That's for sure. I'm very excited about it.
I've been obsessively learning for about 3 years now. And when I say obsessively learning, I mean, that I had written all this stuff, but I had no idea what I was doing with it at all.
Yeah.
I was just learning stuff and then writing about it so that I didn't forget it. And so I had this, it was basically, I had all these different puzzle pieces, but I had no fucking idea what I was building a picture of. And so I started just obsessively learning where I would just, so I used to read the encyclopedia when I was in jail. And when I was a kid, I read the encyclopedia and the dictionary, like we had an encyclopedic dictionary, I read that. And so since getting out of jail, every documentary I can watch, I watch. We've had Smithsonian Channel, PBS, every like all the PBS, the purchase ones.
Yeah.
We've subscribed to all those, Discovery Plus, just like pouring knowledge into my head. And it finally paid off where it finally, I like just learning about ancient civilizations and then finding out how all these cultures blended together. And then, sorry, I didn't mean to cough without hitting a button, but I was trying to formulate my idea and cough at the same time. So anyway, realizing that culture and race and ethnicity were not, they weren't even related, really.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of the perception up until about 10 years ago. And then the genetics started to make it look very stupid. And now it just looks preposterous, but people still hang on to it like it's like those two things are in any way related. And once I was able to do that, now I'm seeing everything sliding around where it's just culture that's dominating things. Everybody was looking at the map. The map doesn't those lines on the map don't fucking matter for anything. What matters is the people and where they are. Because does the state of Nebraska, those lines don't define, I mean, that isn't Nebraska. You guys only live in what, 2 cities?
Yeah, so much of it is farmland that it's like and Nebraska used to be a lot longer. Like the Panhandle used to be like significantly longer. Like
it went all the way to California practically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so like, but the culture of America or the culture of the Midwest or whatever it is, like all these different competing cultures within there, that is what is interesting. And that's also what the story is. And that's why we've all been lost looking at these wars like they mattered at all. My God, I couldn't give a fuck less about watching a war now. People always ask me, oh, I bet you would have been this and that and this time. And I would have been like, I would have been laughing at you dumbasses stabbing each other. I would have been eating steak, fucking your wife, and probably smoking a bunch of weed. But I definitely would have been fighting in that fucking war.
Yeah.
I never would have fought in a war. I made a very stupid and aborted. I dipped my toe in that pond once and no, nah, not for me.
I think it gets glorified to the degree people forget the horrors of war. And I'm not bagging on the military or anything like that. I got friends in the military. I just I mean, those things are regrettable and stupid. And also, what we can easily show is that by looking at history, is that if the pace of civilization had remained slower, like technological change had remained slower and steady, without the rapid spread of smallpox and warfare and all that stuff because of the horse, these records that we have now probably would just be, everybody would have them now because we'd be living in some sort of amazing egalitarian society where AI was doing everything for us and we were just levitating everywhere, lifting weights just for fun. You know what I mean? I love the levitating and the lifting weights thing. Both of those seem like a blast. One of them I can tell you for sure is a blast. Levitation I have not yet we have not yet achieved. As far as
we flying cars are coming in 2024. Did you see the new one?
No, I have not heard about this at all.
Do you not watch the news?
Not really.
Okay, so Dubai will have flying cars by 2024. There's a company called Bellwether. It's Bellwether. They just had a successful test flight of it's a half-size prototype of their flying car, which looks like if you took the idea for a Lamborghini that was taken off the Countach, but like advanced into an alien assault craft, that's what this looks like. And it's going to be flying around Dubai in 2 years. So Yeah, we're living in a literal paradise. Everybody just needs to calm the fuck down.
Yeah, yeah. I need to make a trip to Dubai over the next couple of years. I
You
gotta
need to
test
start
drive
making
out
that
back
Dubai
there.
money and get the fuck out of Nebraska.
Dude, for real. Yeah, I mean, from your mouth to God's ears, man, because that would be quite nice.
So,
Dubai, never been, but I have.
why are you? So you're trapped in Nebraska now?
No, not really
You're not
trapped
allowed to leave?
actually. No, no, no. I can certainly leave. The reason I came back was because a friend of mine who had suggested that I move to Pennsylvania, he ended up moving to a different state. And since I grew up here, I thought, okay, well, I'll move back to Nebraska. I'll spend some time with, family. And so this was in like mid 2019, but I've already
Ah,
got the itch to leave again.
already. Only
Yes,
3 years.
it only took
only,
3 years.
only 3 years in American Siberia.
Yes, exactly. Well, it took less than that, but at this point, the itch has gotten to be like unignorable, we'll say. So,
What? I'm just out of curiosity. So do you live in Omaha?
yeah, also known as Omaha, but I like the better. I like that pronunciation a lot better. It sounds a
There
lot.
was a thing on the league. Anyway, do you ever see the show League?
Of course,
Oh, okay, yeah.
John
That's
LaJoie. Yeah.
yeah. Omaha. But anyway, what is the rent in Omaha out there? What do you pay for?
And it
for a
really
two-bedroom out
depends
there?
on where. Like, okay, so if you're in some of the ritzier parts of town, obviously it's pretty high. But where I
Got that
live,
steak
rent,
money.
mortgage, but yeah, like home ownership here, we'll put it this way, is like extraordinarily high because it's like the cost of living is very low. So this is like we were talking about earlier, like New Jersey gets like a bad rap, but it's like the place to be if you're going to be on the East Coast, right? I wouldn't
Yeah,
say that.
dude, I have a bodega that's 5 minutes from here. The light rail that takes me to work. So I work at a legal weed lounge. So I just hang out and smoke weed all day. And the train that takes me there is 2 minutes walk from here. So I just walk over there, hop on the train, 15 minutes. I'm at work. Don't have to worry about getting arrested by the cops for DUIs or any nonsense like that, or even hurting anyone or doing anything stupid. And then I can pop right back here, or everything's right. It's easy to get to.
Yeah.
And you know what? We have Lyft and Uber here, which I'm sure you've heard of, and you might get one day.
What? No, we have Lyft and Uber, believe it or not. I'm actually surprised that
I'm
we do
just.
because I always thought, no, I'm serious because before I used Uber for
When
the
did you
first
guys
time.
get it?
What's that?
When did you guys get Lyft and Uber?
Oh, it would.
Because I got my DUIs in 2015, and because we didn't have it where I lived. So
Interesting. It was
Yeah.
probably after that because I remember the first time I ever took an Uber was like in 2017 after I moved to Pennsylvania, and then when I moved back to Nebraska, I didn't really need it, but I periodically if I would go to the airport, for instance, like I don't want to drive and like pay to park my car somewhere.
real work.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, I would take an Uber and they had it, but it always struck me as strange because it's like, in Omaha, it's like who really needs it? Like I understand it for big cities. So I was surprised that they
Yeah,
had
but
Lyft and Uber.
everybody has a car, I guess. You're
That's
just
exactly
dead
it.
without a car out there. Yeah.
It's exactly it. So I think it's mostly used by people who are trying to avoid DUIs and people who need to go to the airport. That's the impression that I get.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's too cold to fucking walk anywhere or too hot.
And too far away. There's like
Yeah.
the distance between things. It would boggle your mind.
Yeah. How far away is your nearest convenience store?
It would take about probably 20 minutes to get there on foot.
I genuinely, there's no way I could get drunk enough that it would take me 20 minutes to walk to my bodega.
You could probably
I would
crawl.
die of alcohol poisoning trying to get that drunk
Right,
to walk that
exactly.
slow. Yeah, I could crawl there.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like I'll periodically go to
I couldn't live in that level of inconvenience. That's brutal.
well, you know
Might
what,
as
the
well
night.
live in a yurt.
Yeah, well, why the hell not, man? That'd be fun. But
They're comfy. They're very cozy.
yes, exactly. In Nebraska, I don't know how common a yurt would be. I'll have to look that up. But I will say that it's like the distance of walking. If you're in downtown, it's a lot easier. But I don't live downtown. So for me, yeah, if I wanted to walk to a convenience store, probably going to be like a 20-minute walk, which is a little too much for my taste. But
It's amazing to think Omaha even has a suburb. I struggle to imagine Omaha being that big.
Well, size wise, I think it's
Because I've been to Des Moines and like that was not big.
No. Omaha is not big by the standards of, for instance, like a lot of the bigger towns on the East Coast. But I think if you were to drive, let's say, all the way from like the westernmost edge of Omaha.
Holy shit! We're probably boring the shit out of people. I've come to real. Yeah, they probably
Well,
don't care at all about Omaha. Huh?
I think people have a more. I think they have a morbid curiosity. So we've probably still retained most of the listeners.
Okay, well, let's continue. I was like, why did I even start this?
No, but it's a good question because nobody's been
So
here.
how long does it take to walk across?
Oh God, if you were to walk across it, it would take a long
That was a
time.
joke. It was a joke, man.
Yes,
It was a
exactly.
joke.
But I think similar to your alcohol poisoning story, I think you'd probably try to kill yourself before you ended up making it from one edge of Omaha to the other.
Man, if I end up in Omaha for any reason, it's only because I'm dead and somebody has shipped my corpse there very much against my will.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, if you do end up here while you're still alive, look me up and I will keep you from dying.
Why don't you just get, you could, why would I end up there?
I
It's not like you could get there passing. Where would I be passing through to? Saskatchewan?
that is a very valid point.
Is that north of you?
there's
What? Or
Saskatchewan,
Edmonton?
quite far
don't-
north. Yeah.
Edmonton is a city. I'm just
Yeah.
naming random anything I know in Canada.
The only way that you'd be able to do that is if you like slingshot around Omaha in your flying car. You know, you're like, I'm gonna go right to the Midwest and then just zip
Yeah,
up.
I wouldn't even fly over it, I don't think.
Most people don't.
No, you just to go around it.
Exactly.
Notice
Exactly.
that. Notice you just go around, Everybody else avoided it, and you went back.
I went
more.
back.
You went
I-
back
into
for
the-
seconds.
Into
There's
the
a man who
belly-
makes good decisions. I don't
Yes,
know how I feel about your endorsement now.
Well, that is a very valid question to ask yourself. This may not be such a great endorsement, but if it helps you sell books, it's like it may be worth it after all. So,
There's a lunatic in the tundra who thinks that I'm the shit. Well, thank you, sir.
well, it's my pleasure. It is my pleasure, and I'm glad that I have been officially granted the status of lunatic by the great and mighty Jamie Lewis, who's a berserker if ever there was one on the topic of strength.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And again, folks, go check out plagueofstrength.com. And if you're looking through the older articles, just one hand in front of the screen, just to kind of, if you're squeamish about porn and random scenes of gore. But the articles are worth it.
And I would just like to apologize in advance. As I said, I've grown as a person. I don't
Yes.
use the M word anymore or the R word anymore. But in the past I have, and I apologize. But as I said, I left it in there. I'm growing as a human being. So,
Well, like I said, self-censorship is not at all a necessity. And I think people have a good enough idea of who you are now that if they're discovering you for the first time, they will appreciate the progression. And I'm sure they will look forward to the future Jamie Lewis as much as I am looking forward to it. So once again,
thanks.
plagueofstrength.com. Keep your eyes open for his future books. And as always, folks, thank you for listening in. Have fun and happy training.